but it engendered what we call the underlying feelings to when we feel okay within ourselves. And there are three of them. I feel worthy within myself, not because somebody said so. I feel acceptable to myself, and I feel pretty capable. And we don't ever feel any of the glad emotions like contentment unless normally one or all three of those are there.
Welcome back. We have Dr. Gray Otis here with us tonight, and we're going to be going and diving into Chapter 8. We're going to start out with a question, and it's, how can emotional regulation help us?
It's a great question. This chapter is really focused on building emotional skills. And it's something that we probably don't pay very much attention to. But it's so central to how not only we interact with other people, but most importantly, how we see ourselves. And we call this emotional skill building. It's been called other terms such as emotional intelligence. But these kinds of awareness of how our emotions come about and making sense out of them can make a huge difference in how we see ourselves and how we interact with others.
And I feel like over time this has been more focused on, but traditionally I don't feel like emotional intelligence was talked about almost at all. You know, when they say EQ, most people don't know what that means. And now people are referring to that more generally of, you know, emotional intelligence. So can you give us an example of someone that did this well?
Well, yeah. In the book, we talk about Dev's story, and it's a kind of an interesting situation. Dev and his wife had been married for quite a few years, and she had a sister that was a single mom, and so and they lived fairly close, so she tried to be very supportive of her. And Devin and his wife were planning on having a kind of a date night, doing some things at home, but they were going to be together. And shortly before dinner, she came in and said, "Hey, I'm really sorry, but my sister really needs me tonight." Some kind of a little miniature crisis had come up. And Dev really got upset about it. He was mad. And he said, "You know, this happens all the time, and you're always kind of running and jumping when your sister needs you, but you know, now again, we don't get a chance to spend some time together."
Right.
Well, that could have been the basis of a real blowout.
Yes.
But it was interesting that his wife asked him a question in the context, "You know, it seems to me, Dev, that you're upset about this, and rightfully so. And I imagine you kind of feel rejected and kind of helpless with all of this because this isn't the first time." And Dev kind of stopped and paused. She wasn't defending herself. She was actually, in a sense, connecting with Dev.
Right.
And
empathizing with this.
Empathizing, yeah. And all of a sudden, his emotional reaction to this came way down. And he says, "Yeah, it hurts that you always run to her, and it's kind of like I'm a second class."
Yeah.
And she said, "You know, that's exactly right. And we've got to figure out something to do about this. But for this time around, tomorrow night, no matter what, we have some time, let's do it." Well, she went off, and Dev kind of had time to kind of stop and think about it. How did this work better for them? Instead of having an argument, they came up with a pretty good solution.
Right. And it was
Handled well. Yeah. Well, when he had a chance to talk to his wife later.
Yeah, where did she learn this? Like, that's so neat that she handled it that way.
Yeah. Well, his wife worked in customer relations. And the company that she was working for had some problems with not, totally satisfying their customers. So they brought in a consultant. And the consultant was talking about how to better understand ourselves and how to better understand customers. And she, as she was attending this training, the last day of it, the consultant said, "Oh, and by the way, this works really well for customer relations. That's been demonstrated.
Yes,
but it also works in any other relationships." And she remembered that. When Dev had made that comment, instead of defending herself, she went into that mode of kind of guessing as to where he was coming from, empathizing with him, and coming up with a solution that would work better for both of them. And it did. And as Dev and his wife started to understand this more fully, they were able to work through things much more effectively and more quickly so that they could have a more enjoyable, satisfying relationships with each other. And as I like to say, if it works, then it works.
And it works. Keep going.
Keep on doing it.
So was Dev then able to learn the same skills so that he
Yes.
could also reciprocate that kind of communication pattern?
Yeah. And this really kind of leads to this idea of really understanding ourselves and where our emotions come from. So we like to say in psychology, there are basically 4 emotional groups, 3 of which rhyme with each other. The first 3 are mad, sad, and anxious, and the last one is glad. So we're either glad or mad or sad or anxious. And mad, sad, and anxious can be in different combinations. So for example, if a person's jealous, we might see that expressed as anger, but it also has something to do with anxious. If somebody's flirting with somebody else, I might lose my relationship with that
There's
person.
anxiety and that.
Yes.
That feels interesting.
So it's interesting to kind of understand that we kind of know when we're angry or when we're worried or when we're sad. That's all natural emotions. We all experience those, sometimes referred to as negative emotions. But I like to think that they're what we might refer to as warning emotions. They tell us that something's just not working for us.
Oh.
And it's kind of like pause, stop for a second.
Get curious almost, that idea of instead of just labeling it as I should not be mad or angry, it's like, why am I feeling this way? And really trying to understand the root of that can lead to
Precisely. Yeah. And what we found out a number of years ago is that underneath these emotions are, and they're referred to as secondary emotions in psychology, there are primary emotions, or what we refer to in our book, Key Core Beliefs, as primary feelings or underlying feelings to the emotions. And it's kind of interesting. I've worked with many people, and usually we'll bring up an example where they were upset about something. And then we say, well, let's take a look at what the feelings were. The feelings are very, very fast acting. They're part of our fight, flight, freeze response. And so they happen in much less than 1/10 of a second. We can't control them. But if we look backwards, we can always see what was going on. And when Dev learned about these 5 feelings that his wife talked to him about, he recognized how they were playing out in his life, not in just this instant, but in virtually every instant. In fact, we haven't found the exception to the rule. Now, there are actually more feelings than 5, but for simplicity's sake, to understand, they cover really all of the major bases. So,
what are they?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you asked.
Now we need to make sure we understand these.
Well, we call these the GRUP underlying feelings, and they generate all of our emotions in terms of mad, sad, and anxious. Okay. So a GRUP is an acronym that stands for 5 different feeling states. And again, these are momentary. We don't actually are consciously aware of them when they occur, but we can always track back to it. So the idea is if we can understand what's going on in ourselves, we can better understand ourselves and others. So in this case, his wife kind of guessed at some of his feelings, and she was right. So as Dev looked back on that, he said, a GRUP, what does that stand for? Oh, yeah. Accused, guilty, rejected, unlovable, and powerless. So as Dev looked at it, he said, I kind of did feel a little accused. And then he realized that he was accusing himself.
Oh, so it doesn't have to be from the other person necessarily.
And it doesn't even have to be an accusation in any way, shape, or form. These are just feelings. They don't have to make logical sense. They're just what we're experiencing. So he said, yeah, I did feel a little accused. And the person that accuses us the most often, of course, is ourselves. And he said, I also felt guilty.
So why did he feel accused? Why was he accusing himself?
Because he kind of felt like he should have been acting differently. I shouldn't be treating my wife by, flying off the handle at her.
okay.
And that kind of led to guilty, but in a different way. Felt guilty because Dev knew that his wife was trying to do the right thing for her sister, and he felt guilty that he didn't feel good about that.
Interesting.
And, again, we can feel guilty when there's no guilt involved.
Present at all, right.
But in this case, it's kind of legitimate to see how Dev would kind of process it that way.
Right.
Now, of course, he felt a little rejected because his wife was
She's
leaving him.
leaving
And
to help.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly right. And unlovable feels like rejection, but I always like to kind of say it kind of as feeling rejected multiplied by a factor of 5. Because unlovable happens only in relationships that are really important to us. Family relationships, people that we really hold in high regard, somebody that we feel close to, a good friend, for example. And he felt a little unlovable because, and this is the expression that we kind of sometimes use to identify that, if my wife really loved me,
She would do X or whatever.
yeah, and because she didn't, I must not be worthy to be loved. At that, again, moment in time.
Oh, that's sad.
And finally, of course, he did feel powerless because he knew that
She was going to go help. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Her
So-
decision had already been made. It was, yeah.
Exactly right. So what he experienced, though, when his wife kind of acknowledged at least some of those, and by the way, it can be any combination. Sometimes a person just feels helpless or powerless. Sometimes a person will feel guilty because they did something wrong. Okay, but it's usually in some kind of combination. And once he recognized that, oh, that's why I was feeling the way I was, then he also was able to understand that his wife had shifted things around because she linked in with him using empathy to understand possibly where he was coming from in terms of his feelings, and then to come up with a solution that worked for it. And when that happened, we switched from mad, sad, or anxious, in this case, anxious and mad,
Right.
over to glad. So we haven't talked about that yet, but glad is any feeling that's kind of in a positive way, but the most common one is just being okay within ourselves, a sense of peace, for example, or
Okay.
contentment. But it certainly includes being joyous or happy or
Yes.
whatever.
Yes. Okay.
But he was just almost dumbfounded as to how his anger had shifted so quickly, and he felt kind of, yeah, I'm okay. He had felt like he was heard and understood and accepted. We'll talk about that more. But it engendered what we call the underlying feelings to when we feel okay within ourselves. And there are 3 of them. I feel worthy within myself, not because somebody said so. I feel acceptable to myself. And I feel pretty capable.
I'm guessing that's an acronym as well.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Those are the whack feelings.
Okay. And that leads to the ultimate feeling of gladness. Right?
Being okay.
Okay.
And we don't ever feel any of the glad emotions like contentment unless normally
have those.
one or all 3 of those are there. And quite commonly, it's kind of interesting, quite commonly all 3 are. So we have the grunt feelings, accused, guilty, rejected, unlovable, and powerless. And we have the whack feelings, feeling worthy, acceptable, and capable. One day, this was being taught to a bunch of folks that were in recovery, and one of the guys piped up and said, "Oh, I get it. When I'm out of whack, I'm a grup."
Oh, that is perfect. That's a really good analogy though to feel that way. You know, people say that like, I just feel out of whack. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a great acronym. You're not feeling one of those 3 things,
No.
right? And
You are feeling one of the others.
and you are feeling one of those other feelings. Wow, that is.
And the good news is we always shift back from our grup feelings and our anger or whatever is going on to sooner or later getting back to who we always really are, worthy, acceptable, and capable.
So when you're in a situation where you're having a communication with someone, and you feel like they are feeling one of those 5 core feelings, is that when you try to empathize and recreate the whack
Yeah.
feelings.
Yeah.
Okay.
And when we do that by understanding the other person, where they're coming from, we can't help but feel more worthy, acceptable, and capable to ourselves. When they feel heard, understood, and accepted, they can't help but feel more worthy, acceptable, and capable to themselves.
So it's an upward spiral, just how we
Yeah.
see these downward spirals that are these cyclical patterns. This seems like a positive cyclical pattern.
Exactly right. And it's important to understand that arguments do go cyclically down.
Yes.
But if one or both of them will start to shift back into more empathetic, asking some gentle questions, kind of guessing where the person is, coming up with some ideas, often that argument will turn into a much more positive circumstance. But regardless, whether it does or not, arguments don't last forever. Sooner or later, we get back to whack.
Yeah.
The question is it sooner or later?
Or later.
And if we get good at this emotional skill building in terms of awareness and then understanding others as well, we're going to get there sooner because it is a skill. And like any other skill, we just learn about it, practice it, and sooner or later it becomes almost second nature.
And how many people want to live in a relationship that's out of whack? You know, it's like
That's right.
the faster, the more enjoyable your entire relationship can be with that person. You know, so might as well really hone in on these skills so that we can create these beautiful relationships that can be positive the majority of the time.
Exactly right. In fact, the vast majority of the time. And yeah, we're all going to have speed bumps, okay?
Right.
But it doesn't mean that they're going to damage us or cause a real rift in our relationship if we come back to learning how to use these skills for ourselves and then to connect with others in very positive ways. Can't help but be a win-win.
Yeah. It almost reminds me, you know, there's so much contention in the world at large, but you can have conflict, you know, a difference of opinion or anything without that contention. And that's
Yes.
that's what I see that you're trying to really help people understand, that you can have that conflict without any contention.
Yes.
That's beautiful.
It really does work. And that's, as I say to a lot of people, I'm not terribly concerned about right or wrong. I am concerned about what works and what doesn't work. And usually that leads us to things that are more right and less wrong.
Yes, naturally kind of sifts
Yes,
out that way.
right.
Okay, so I have another question. How do we create more positive primary feelings?
Well, that's a good question as well because it's an ongoing effort. And it's just, first off, being aware. Am I upset about something? Am I worried about something? Am I down about something? We need to understand that. And then to ask ourselves, okay, what's going on underneath? Find out what those abrupt feelings are. Often they're feelings of powerlessness or helpless, but they can be tied to any of the other feeling accused, guilty, rejected, or unlovable. But if we recognize that, then we can do something. You know, a lot of people think their emotions kind of come out of,
Nowhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but they really do have a basis, and they're all there, as I said earlier, as warning emotions to say something's not working very well for us. Okay, let's back out of that, and let's figure out what would work better. We can come up a lot of times with our own solutions, and as soon as we do that, then we're right on the right path to getting back to who we really are as worthy, acceptable, and capable individuals.
And I like when you said, you know, we can figure out where we are and we can find those solutions, because I think a lot of people think when they're in these states of negativity, it's it's somebody else's fault.
Yes.
This is hard. And instead of, it's really the difference of I'm going to act instead of being acted upon. And you take back that agency. You say, okay, why wasn't this working for me? And what is the best way that I can see to solve this? You know, we have so much more control over our happiness and well-being that I think people really understand.
Exactly right. And in terms of what we're talking about here, this is sometimes referred to as emotional regulation. If we can figure out that these things just don't come out of nowhere and that we can, as you say, exercise a degree of control or regulation over them, then we are able to move our lives forward in a very positive ways. And it does take time, and it does take kind of an attention to some of these things. But it's amazing. Some time ago, I got a little upset with my adult son. And I turned around and said, "You just don't understand." And I walked down the hall and walked into my bedroom. There was a big mirror there. And I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, "Gray, what's going on here?" Now, I didn't take the time to go through whether I was feeling abrupt, but I was. Primarily powerless and maybe a little unlovable. But immediately at that point, because I'd been working with this for so long, I just turned around, went back down the hallway and said, John, hey, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, okay. And we wound up having a wonderful conversation after that point.
Because you chose to turn around, recreate that bond, put in that effort to connect with him.
And I would have done that sooner or later anyway. But to do it in a matter of seconds instead of minutes, hours, or days.
Yeah. Sometimes weeks, months, or years.
That's
there's
exactly
some
right.
Relationships that it ends so negatively. There is just a severing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of just let's solve this right now. Let's get back to let's not be out of whack for too long.
Exactly.
Oh, I love it. Okay. My next question is, how can we change our abrupt experiences?
It's about looking backwards on ourselves and our experiences to understand where we did feel at some point kind of disadvantaged, that we didn't want to deal with something that was upsetting to us. Many
Can
of
you
us.
Explain that a little bit.
Well, many of us have had upsetting experiences in childhood, our teenage years, our young adult years. And it's really helpful to go back and say, okay, what was I feeling then? And now we start to make sense of it. And then if we also use that same approach to understanding where the other person was, we can kind of get to a better sense of how we see ourselves. And that, yeah, we all are going to face those trials, challenges, difficulties, but we can now kind of make a greater sense out of them. We find that this is true, particularly people that have dealt with a lot of even trauma or chronic distress. And they kind of feel like they're a prisoner within themselves. By understanding these things, they can kind of break out of those prisons and kind of see themselves more positively or accurately and constructively. And that can make all the difference in the world.
Yeah. It's almost like they're able to fully process that in a different way, at least, than they had before.
That's exactly right. And a lot of times when we see people that are kind of stuck, it is because they haven't been able to process through things. Once you can see it and make sense out of it, then you have processed it, and to a large degree, you resolved it and are able to be freed up from that and move on.
Wow. Instead of being trapped in those feelings, you see them, you let them almost, flow through you, and then you can move on, it sounds like.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. Can you tell us, how can we use self-care and positive engagement in situations like this?
Yeah. And that leads us to a discussion about the 6 possibilities. Whenever we come up on a decision, we only have 6 options. And the first 4 don't work very well, and the last 2 do. Okay? And I always say, the first 2, if not 3. The first one is to fight, and to get into kind of what I refer to as attack mode. So I can just kind of give a dirty look at somebody, and I'm in attack mode. Okay. That doesn't really help. Usually people are going to negatively respond to that.
Right.
Okay. The second one is to go into flight mode or avoid. And that just simply means I don't want to be here, get me out of here emotionally or physically, because this is too difficult for me to deal with.
Okay.
The third one is what has been discovered not too long ago in psychology, the freeze mode. And that just simply means that we are kind of frozen. We kind of numb things out. I kind of talk about it in the context that, for example, if I don't want to deal with something and my coping mechanism is drugs or alcohol, well, I can go both into flight mode. In other words, I'm going to avoid the circumstance, and also into freeze mode. I'm going to numb it out so I won't feel it.
That makes sense. And most people, I think most people have heard, fight or flight.
Yeah.
That's the default. But
Right.
But yeah, I don't think as many people can realize that. Numbing yourself is a very big default that people use. Yeah.
And to be truthful, everybody uses all of these.
Yes.
From time to time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it doesn't have to be physically fighting, like you said. That could be a verbal attack. That could be an emotional. That could be a facial expression. That could be so many different ways that these can be manifested, right?
Exactly right. Well, the fourth one of these is the one we don't talk about very much, but it's kind of attack mode too, but it's attack ourselves. We get after ourselves, we beat ourselves up. And as we look at those 4 options, again, typically a person will use one or more of them as kind of automatic this is where I go. If I'm
Their
upset,
default
or
kind of.
yeah, if
Okay.
I'm sad, get me out of here. I just want to be left alone. So that's avoid flight, so to speak. And so it's typical they're kind of, we call them reactions because it doesn't take much brain power to do them. We just kind of almost automatically go to one or more of those kinds of options that really don't work for us very well.
Okay, and the attack self, I feel like this one is not talked about
No.
hardly at all. Is this something as can you describe that one a little bit in more detail? Is this someone that would say, there's situations like, oh, it was my fault.
Yes.
I was the problem in it. Why did I screw up like that? Is that it, or is it something different? Or how would
it's
look?
that and so many other things. It's any time we kind of go after ourselves, blame ourselves, and then we kind of punish ourselves. And again, we've all done that. Something happens to us at work. We come home, we're upset, and we go round and around and around. I must have done something wrong. There was a problem there, but I didn't know what it was. Somebody took offense at something that was said, and I don't really understand that because I wasn't trying to be offensive. All of these kinds of things we turn inward to kind of go after ourselves because we're trying to make sense out of things. But often we're just kind of going around in circles.
Okay.
And it also leads to this kind of very circular thinking that can go on for hours, if not days. So I was just talking with somebody not too long ago, and she was up at 3 o'clock in the morning trying to figure out why she had said something that she thought was kind of pleasant to her husband, and he didn't think it was pleasant at all. But he didn't understand that, nor did he explain it to her. So she was still trying to figure it out
Trying to figure that out.
in the wee hours of the morning,
Oh,
and kind of beating herself up because she had done something and she didn't even know what it was.
Know what it was. She was
Talk
trying-
about feeling unlovable and powerless.
Yeah. Wow. Out of these four, do you see that there's one used more common than another one, or are they all kind of used the same amount as far as what people default to?
It's really, everybody's kind of individual in that regard. Okay. But if you want to ask what's the most common one of the four, it's always attacking myself.
Really?
Yeah. So for example, somebody is turning to self-harm. Okay, that would be avoid. And that would also be, oddly enough, numbing. There's pain there, obviously, if it's self-harm, but it's numbing out the rest of the emotional experience. But no matter what they do as a coping mechanism in the first three, typically they will come back and kind of go after themselves, punish themselves. See, I shouldn't have done that. I did it again. So we can never really escape from ourselves. And the one that we most commonly revert to sooner or later is going after ourselves and attacking ourselves.
Which is not helpful.
It's almost a self-form of emotional abuse.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work. No.
And I've heard if you wouldn't say it to your best friend, don't say it to yourself.
Exactly
be
right.
So aware of those thoughts that are coming in, and don't let your thought processes get hijacked. And that's what happens a lot of times in these situations, right? And then all of a sudden you're ruminating and all these negative thoughts are racing through your head, and to be able to just realize I'm self-attacking right now, and this is not helpful, and this is not serving me.
That's right. And that means that we've got to get out of that circular thinking and get to something that works. And there's only two things
tell
that
us,
work.
What are these two that do work?
Yeah. So out of the 6 options, the last 2 are sometimes referred to as self-care and positive engagement with others.
Okay.
So I am working with people. I will say, what do you do that's good for you that takes care of yourself? And it's really interesting. I asked them to write down 5 different things that they find worthwhile, somewhat enjoyable, or comfortable for them.
Okay.
Things that they can do on their own, doesn't require any...
Okay, so it's not necessarily with other people.
No.
You can do this on your own.
Just,
okay.
Yep. It's all up to you if you want to.
Yeah.
And people struggle with that. It's kind of interesting that what do you do to take good care of yourselves?
Yes. I was just having this conversation with a woman over the weekend, and we were talking about this, just in general, and how important it is to make sure our buckets are filled as
Yes.
we give and give and give. And I asked this one individual, and it was a total blank.
Yeah.
She's like, no one's ever asked that to me before.
When I'm working with individuals, I actually take some time in the office, put down 1 through 5 and say, fill them in. What do you really enjoy? And they do struggle with that. Sometimes I give them a little bit of an idea. But we all have things that are just good for us. It might be a hobby. It might be kind of a physical activity such as yoga. It might be something that's kind of a fun food to eat or fix. It can be any of a number of things, and it's different for everybody. But we need to come up with 5 different things that are kind of on a list that we can go to. There are go-to things that we can take care of ourselves. And it's really interesting because when they get to 5, I say there's good news and there's bad news. And they say, what's the good news? Well, the good news is you've identified 5 things that you didn't even think about before. They were there, but you didn't think about it.
Really thought about them.
Yeah. The bad news is now write down 6 through 10.
Oh, okay. So you really want people to come up with 10.
Yeah. Yeah. At a minimum. And oh, by the way, we all do way more than 10 things.
Right.
To take care of ourselves,
But I think it's just with life and how busy things get, and if someone were to ask me, okay, you have 30 minutes, do anything you want on your own. If you don't have that 5, I think I would just default to, well, I'm just going to finish up that load of laundry. I'm going to do those dishes instead of thinking, okay, how am I going to replenish?
Exactly. How do I replenish? I love the term recreation. It means to recreate ourselves. And if we don't take the time to do that, we'll deplete ourselves. And we need to have that ability to, first off, conceive what works for us in different circumstances, and then choose one or more of those to engage in.
Figure out how it works,
Yep.
how it works for you.
Exactly, how it works for you.
And I think that's important to know that it's something that doesn't require another person. Because I'm sure there's a lot of things, of course, let's, go grab some drinks together or go out to dinner together. But I think it's really important to know that you can do something completely on your own that can rejuvenate you. Because there's times where that won't be an option, where you can meet up with someone, and we need to be able to refill our buckets without anybody else, without needing, anybody else there at that time. So
yes,
that's really smart that's how you're looking at it. Okay. And what is the number 6?
it's to engage positively with another person.
Okay.
And again, I ask them to write down 5 people that they feel just naturally comfortable with. People that they could talk to on a moment's notice, or send them a text, or interact with them in any positive way. Okay. And again, sometimes people have a little bit of a challenge figuring out who are those 5 people. But I always like to say we have if we're in the center, we have people around us that are good people that we can engage with. It might be somebody we know in a community organization. Certainly, we hope it'll be at least one family member, and perhaps quite a few family members, okay? And we certainly want to include friends. So it's interesting that people will kind of struggle with that one too. But once they get that picture in their mind, and then I say, and oh, by the way, these people are kind of surrounding you. They're your kind of go-to people. Yes. And are you, for each one of them, a go-to person for them?
Could they call you up and be able to just talk something out, or that you could, help them work through something?
And it's really important that we have these kind of comfortable, easygoing relationships in our lives. If we don't have them, we need to develop them. But almost everybody has people that they know, people that they've known, for example, many years, and maybe live, 100 miles or 200 miles away. And yet they know that if they sent them a text, they'd get a response. Or if they gave them a call, they could chat on the phone. Right. So we want to identify who those people are, and to make sure that, again, that we're also kind of in their circle of support.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. And to be able to have, relationships at different times, can be strained for different reasons. But I really like how you can have these 5 where it's comfortable. You feel safe. There's a high trust account with these individuals, and you know that you are, you're able to be accepted the way you are, and to show up the way you are, and to feel that that empathy with them. I think
Yeah.
is important.
I think the operative word there is to have just a wonderful, trusting relationship that people mutually care about each other.
Yes.
And that's what all friendships are about, right?
Yeah. Wow. This has been so important to hear these different ways that we default, and that we can choose, are we going to default into the first 4, which don't serve us at all, or are we going to default into the last 2, which can really change and benefit us as individuals and every relationship that we have.
Absolutely. And I think the important thing to kind of bring these two ideas together is when we're feeling accused, guilty, rejected, unlovable, or powerless, we are not helpless. If we choose to do something that's good for us in terms of taking care of ourselves, or if we positively engage with others, or if we do both. The other 4 aren't going to work, but these 2 do. And oh, by the way, going back to your prior discussion, that's how we get back to being worthy, acceptable, and capable. If I'm out of whack, I'm a grup. If I'm a grup, let's get back to whack.
Let's get back. And there's ways to do it. So,
Yes.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We're excited to really work on and implement things like this. And so thank you so very much.
Oh, thank you.